And ladies and gentlemen, we are streaming live and recording.
Great.
The meeting is yours.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the July 10th meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Elizabeth Canuel, Chair of the Delta Independent Science Board, and I would like to call this morning's meeting to order. In accordance with federal, state, and local guidelines to protect public health and safety in response to the coronavirus disease, this meeting will be conducted entirely via remote access. We will take written questions and comments. Please email your public comments to disb@deltacouncil.ca.gov. And in your request, please indicate the agenda item in which you would like to have your public comments read. If you prefer to provide oral comments, please use the raise hand function in Zoom or email disb@deltacouncil.ca.gov on the agenda item in which you would like to provide public comment. And then once you have let us know that you have public comment, please wait until prompted to provide your comments. So at this stage in the meeting, I would like to take a roll call, and I will run through the members of the Delta ISB. I ask you to indicate any declarations that you have discovered or conflicts of potential interest, conflicts of interest that have arisen since the last meeting. And if there are conflicts of interest, indicate whether you need to recuse yourself on any item for today's meeting. So just I'll begin. Elizabeth Canuel, I have no changes. Steve Brandt.
Steve Brandt, good morning, everyone. No changes.
Tracy Collier.
Tracy Collier, no changes.
Joe Fernando.
Joe Fernando, no changes.
Tom Holzer.
Tom Holzer, no changes.
Jay Lund.
Good morning, no changes.
Richard Norgard.
Richard Norgard, no changes.
Vince Resch.
Vince Resch, no changes.
And John Weens.
John Weens, no changes.
Perfect. And I've already checked in. It sounds like all of our presenters for today's meeting are on the Zoom call. So I'll just move on to our next agenda item, which is the Delta ISB Chair Report and Business Matters. I just wanted to highlight to everyone that our revised operating guidelines are part of today's meeting package, and that the guidelines have been posted to the Delta ISB website. Secondly, I'd like to mention that there has been a new addition to the Delta ISB staff support team, and I'm going to turn things over to Karen Kafitz from the Delta Science Program, who will introduce the new addition to the support staff team.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Liz. So I'm pleased to announce that we have a new member joining our unit. Chelsea Batavia has taken a position as an environmental scientist. She'll be working both to support the adaptive management functions of our unit, as well as working directly with the board to support your reports. Chelsea comes to us from Oregon State University, where she's just completed a PhD and a postdoc researching the ethical dimensions of environmental conservation and management. I'm going to hand it over to Chelsea to briefly introduce herself some more.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for that introduction, Karen. I'm really pleased to be at this meeting and to meet you all. for the first time. My name is Chelsea Batavia, as Kira mentioned, and I have been at Oregon State for the past 7 years. I came to Oregon State after doing a Bachelor of Arts at Georgetown University with a major in theology. And then I spent some time just kind of working and doing some self-reflecting, and eventually realized that environmental conservation and management were the fields that I was interested in eventually pursuing. So I went to graduate school, but always really with the hope that I would be able to eventually find my way back out into the world and do more applied work rather than staying in an academic setting. So, having gained some skills in the social sciences, particularly conservation and environmental psychology, and also kind of a broad training in environmental ethics and environmental philosophy, I'm really, really pleased to be able to bring those skills and experience to the Delta Stewardship Council and the science program now, and support the adaptive management program. So I'll leave it there, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Thanks, Chelsea. That was really great. And I'll just say that we're going to invite Chelsea to give a bigger presentation about her background at an upcoming meeting once we have the new board members. So look forward to that this fall if you're staying on the board.
Great. Well, thank you, Karen, and thank you, Chelsea, for giving us a brief introduction. I'm sure that your contributions to the science program, as well as interactions with the Delta ISB, will prove to be quite profitable. As you know, there's a lot of interest in greater integration between the social and natural sciences, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
All right. So that completes my report. Before we go on to the next agenda item, I just wanted to give a brief overview of the agenda for today's meeting. After I wrap up, we will have a report from the council chair, Susan Tatayan. We will then follow that with a report from the Delta lead scientist, John Callaway. Then we'll run through updates and discussion of current Delta ISB activities. From there, we will move on to preparing for upcoming Delta ISB meetings. So we'll have a brief discussion about about ways to make remote meetings be effective, especially as we are onboarding new board members and having transitions in the board leadership. And then we'll also have a brief discussion of the agenda, which is still being developed for the August 13th, 14th meeting. And at that meeting, we'll have both the current members of the Delta ISB as well as incoming members to the board joining us. So before I move on, are there any comments or questions from members of the board? All right, I'm not seeing any. Are there any comments from the public?
There are none.
Okay, perfect. So let's move on to our next agenda item, which is the council chair and executive officer report, which will be delivered by Susan Tatayan.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning, Susan.
So my husband and I are having bandwidth issues. So excuse me if I suddenly drop off. Good to see you all this morning. Starting with the highlights from the June council meeting, I'm very glad to report that the council voted unanimously to appoint the new independent science board members. And in my last report to you, I had talked about an appeal coming before the council on the Lower Yellow Ranch restoration project, their certification of consistency. That appeal has been withdrawn. The parties, the project proponent and the appellant, were able to work things out between themselves, which actually is quite a relief to our staff given COVID and the workload. And then finally, we will be having a DPIC meeting Monday, July 13, starting at 1 o'clock. And Dr. Steve Brandt will be giving an update on the science needs assessment and the workshops that have been, the discussions that have been taking place in preparation for the workshop on the science needs assessment. Also, as part of the DPIC meeting, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation will be presenting an overview of the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, and the Department of Water Resources will be presenting highlights of their incidental take permit for state water project operations under State Endangered Species Act. And the intent of those two items is a follow through from the last DPIC meeting, in which we talked about accelerating ecosystem-based management of the Delta. In addition to those two items, we'll also have an update on progress being made in implementing the 3 priority actions in the Delta Science and Funding Governance Initiative. And so Mario Manzo from the Bureau of Reclamation will present on the first cross-cut budget. They were able to gather data from a majority of the DPIC agencies, and so this is a major milestone. We'll take a look at that budget, and then that's the part of the DPIC meeting that includes Dr. Brandt's presentation. We'll also have a presentation on our efforts to update the science action agenda. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Susan.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any questions from members of the board? Yeah, looks quiet. All right, let's see. So are there any questions from the public on Susan's report?
There are none.
Right, well, thank you, Susan. I'm looking forward to the DPIC meeting on Monday afternoon, and we'll try to stay attuned to that.
Great. Thank you.
Great. All right, let's move on to the Delta Lead Scientist report from John Callaway.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Liz. So I want to start first, just as Susan mentioned, there's a lot of activity around the science action agenda. And so there will be an update on that at the DPIC meeting on Monday, as Susan did mention. In addition to that update, there's been a lot of outreach going on to individual agencies, to all of the various collaborative groups around the Delta, other stakeholders. There is a survey out now, and the first step in the science action agenda for this update is to get input on management questions that will guide the development of science actions to address those questions. So the survey is to get input on those management questions. And if you have input, I would encourage you to provide that through the survey. It's open through next Friday, July 17th. And then in September, the staff will take all of that input that's received through the survey and otherwise, and distill down all of that input into a draft list of management questions. There'll be a workshop September 29th to get broader input on that and to try to come to some consensus on the top management questions. So that workshop registration is already available online, and I would encourage you to participate in that as well. Other events coming up, September 8th through 10th. We have a workshop on spring run Chinook salmon. It'll take place on 3 half days, 3 mornings across that September 8th to 10th. The focus of the workshop is to identify the current understanding for Chinook, the spring run Chinook in the Sacramento River Valley, to look at data gaps and to identify begin to develop population estimates for that particular run. So that is being organized by the science program in coordination with the Department of Water Resources and California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And registration for that workshop is also available online, and we can send out links for that if you haven't seen that. And then third, I wanted to just update you in terms of the Sea Grant Extension Specialist. We had the 4 candidates, really 4 outstanding candidates who gave presentations in June. That the hiring decision for that position has to go through approval through the UC faculty hiring process. Unfortunately, their faculty hiring committee doesn't meet during the summer, so a final decision won't be made until September when they actually do meet. But I would encourage you, we'll update you in September, and the plan is that the person who will take on that position will start sometime in October or November. And then Edmund, if you could turn on the slides. So Susan did mention that at the council meeting, the Stewardship Council did unanimously approve all 6 ISB members. I just wanted to highlight them here. I think they'll be a great addition to the board, and I encourage you, if you haven't already, to read their bios. The bios are already up at the web page for the Independent Science Board, and they plan to participate in the meeting in August, so they get a chance to meet with you and interact with you. So I think that was a major step, and also thank you to all of the people that gave input, all of you, the ISB members who gave input on and suggestions on candidates, as well as the staff members at the council and at USGS who helped in the review process. And then I also wanted to mention, usually we don't mention internal awards, but I wanted to let you know, Edmund, we have end of the fiscal year awards that go out to staff within the council. And there were 2 team awards, one for the efforts to make documents accessible and available with the new ADA compliance issues. And then there was an award for the efforts to make the meetings available online so quickly and so effectively, both for the council as well as for the ISB. Edmund was part of the teams for both of those. So in particular for that second award for making your meetings available and so effective online, I just wanted to let you know that Edmund received that, since he does so much work behind the scenes. And then actually, if you can go to the next slide. Last, I wanted to just mention to you the paper that I presented to the council last month. The title is "The Large Contributions from Anthropogenic Warming to an Emerging North American Megadrought." This came out in Science in April and received lots of attention, so I think probably most of you are aware of the article. It was using tree ring data to understand historic soil moisture conditions going back to the year 800, and to look at the recent mega drought over the last 20 years, comparing that to long-term drought conditions or mega drought conditions in the historic record. And what they found was that the recent mega drought, starting in the year 2000, was the second most intense mega drought that has occurred going back to 800. Only the drought that circled there with the yellow ring in the late 1500s, 1600s was more intense. There were also, each of the red bars indicates an intense megadrought period, the 5 most intense megadrought periods. You can see that 3 of them are actually wider than the current drought. So there have been times in the past when we've had longer droughts, and who knows, this period may continue into the future. The other thing to highlight from the article is that they used some modeling to factor out the effect of anthropogenic climate change related temperature increases on the current mega drought. Without climate change, the current drought would have ranked 11th rather than 2nd. So clearly climate change, as is indicated in the pie chart there, with about 50% of the intensity or severity of the drought being driven by climate change rather than natural variability. So I think this just highlights the importance of planning, of being aware of these potential conditions, planning now for increasing drought conditions, and really thinking much more significantly about climate change as you all have been pushing all of us to do. So if there's any questions on the paper or any of the other updates, happy to answer those.
Thanks, John. That's a very interesting paper, and it sort of points out 2 different aspects of drought. One is the intensity of the drought, but also the duration of droughts.
Yeah, definitely.
Any
and also
questions?
I think this, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, and also it's quite interesting. It says toward the end that the natural variability is now kicking in. So that's the reason we have more wetter years, 2019 or so, because the natural variability is taking over. And in the future, how we control the greenhouse gases will determine the nature of the drought.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we have had in California, we've had some of the wettest years as well as the driest years. So there is that natural variability clearly is significant.
Vince?
Yeah, John, this is not on the paper, but does the committee want input from the Independent Science Board on the social science candidates for those of us that have watched the seminars?
If you have input, you could please forward it on to me. I'd be happy to take your input.
Okay. And again, if you could resupply the links to the survey and to the conference.
Yes, I will send you the survey and the registration for both of those, the workshop as well as the workshop on the Science Action Agenda, as well as that on the Spring Run Salmon.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Sure.
And actually, I'm just going to follow up on Vince's question. So I know you said that the selection of the candidate for the Sea Grant Extension Specialist, that hiring would not be completed until September when the UC Davis faculty get together. But has a decision been made about a first choice candidate that will be recommended to the UC Davis or faculty, or are you still in the process of making that decision? I guess I'm trying to assess, what's the window of opportunity for
the window is short, so if you have input, give that soon.
Okay, thank you. See, any other questions from the board? Any questions for John from the public?
And Liz, then I also wanted to turn it over to Lauren Hastings, and Lauren is going to give you an update on the review that she's taking on and just getting underway now. So
great.
Lauren, take it away.
Thank you, Lauren.
Great. Thanks, John and Liz. Hopefully everyone can hear me.
Yes, we hear you well, clearly.
Great. Well, I wanted to give everyone an update on this assessment of Delta Independent Science Board recommendations. As a reminder, I did mention it at your March meeting of this year, right before we all went to remote meetings, I believe. And so I have some updates now that I wanted to talk about. In March, all of you took a look at that assessment and gave me feedback. So thank you very much. And as a reminder, the assessment is coming about because, as you all know, you've done 10 years of work. You've been around for 10 years. 6 of you have left or are leaving soon. We have 6 new members coming on board. So it just seems like a really good time to do a look back, document all of the reviews you've done. What are the recommendations in all of those reviews? Document the processes that you've used to generate, plan for, implement, and do outreach for those reviews. Document how those processes have evolved over time. And then probably of most interest is do our best to assess the actual value and impact of your reviews. What things have changed because of the reviews, either on management, science, or policy. So that's really what the purpose is of this review. The expected outcome is, and then of course, we'll develop some recommendations for improvements to those processes with the expected outcome that by doing this look back, soliciting feedback from all of you, from council members, from staff, from all of the community of agencies that you serve, that will get really helpful recommendations on how you can make improvements, how you and those that support you, including the science program and the council, can help make improvements to increase the value and impact of your reviews. So since the March meeting, when I talked about the prospectus, I have updated the prospectus. We didn't release it today, but I've updated a little bit based on the feedback I got from all of you, from John Callaway, from Louise Conrad, and made a few changes. So among those changes are that we've actually decided to broaden the scope a little bit. If you recall, originally we were looking at maybe 3 or 4 of your reviews, with the target being to get something out by your August meeting. Well, what has happened is since then, with the COVID impacts, my whole review has been delayed a bit, the assessment. In addition, we also have, as you've just met today, Chelsea Batavia is now on board with some background in social science and how to do surveys and interviews. So she's actually been assigned to help on this project, which is wonderful. Edmund is helping with the project. So what's nice is I've got a team that I'm working with to do this project. So we've decided, and I met with some of the ISB members last week, ran this idea by them. I met with Liz and Vince, John Weens and Tracy, and they agreed it would be nice to broaden the scope to actually include take a look at all the thematic reviews you've done. So those that are responsive to the Delta Reform Act charge, to review all of the science programs every 4 years that support adaptive management in the Delta. To also take a look at another class of work that you've done, which is responding to document review requests, things like looking at Delta Plan amendments, looking at science program draft products, things like that, water fix products. And then the third class that I'm going to also include is the memos that you've produced. Things like your memo on calls to action for looking at integrated modeling linked to multiple levee failures. That was an example. Another one more recently is your memo about looking at science in terms of rapid change and how there need to be efforts made and how the science in the Delta is being done and how it's being governed. And that has clearly been taken up by DPIC and others. So I'm going to take a look at all of those and then also extend the deadline, look beyond August. So I'm thinking this whole effort's probably going to take till at least the end of the calendar year to really cover everything thoroughly. But the group that I met with last week agreed it would be really helpful, I think, and they thought, to look at all of those in terms of looking at your full body of work and then providing recommendations for the full body of work. So We've also come up with an approach. I still am going to try, with the help of Chelsea and Edmund, to come up with at least some findings of what we can do between now and your August meeting. I think we've got a great start with really Edmund's help and all the staff that have supported the ISB over the years, all the fellows, in getting an inventory of all the independent science board reviews and recommendations, documenting as best we can the outreach strategies. So we'll hopefully see what we can do providing findings on that. We're also going to add, as I mentioned earlier, this description of what were the processes actually used for planning for those reviews, implementing them, and providing outreach for them. For that, we'll do what we can. But we're also going to need your help. We've taken a look at this already and realized that in some cases we may not know, staff may not know the details of what you did. So we're going to really rely on you, and especially those departing ISB members, for some input on what processes did you really use that we may not be aware of. And then we'll see what we can do to start assessing value and impact. And so we've got, with Chelsea's help especially, here's the approach we've talked about, initiating, and we'll see how far we get. But we're going to kind of copy you all in terms of using the approach of questionnaires, interviews, and potentially, I don't know if you can see, my cat has decided to join the screen here. I guess she's not on there. But questionnaires, interviews, and potentially talking with panelists at your meetings to get input from the stakeholder community that you serve. So Chelsea has agreed to use her expertise to help with developing a questionnaire that we would initiate, put it out to the broad science and management community, where we get the overall impression from folks. What do you think? Big picture of the Delta Independent Science Board and the collective body of work. What is everyone's awareness of your reviews in general? What's their awareness of some specific reviews? These are just some ideas we're tossing around, so nothing has been generated yet. What's people's awareness, if any, of very specific recommendations? Which reviews were viewed most valuable to those individuals? And I think there's going to be a range of value there. What were least valuable? How were the reviews used? Did they use them? And if so, how? And what are their suggestions for improvement? So we're going to develop this questionnaire and try to get that out. And in addition, we've got a two-pronged approach. So between now and August, we are going to target specific individuals to talk with, folks that we know are very aware of your body of work, including all of you. We are going to interview you again to get your impressions of your work, what your recommendations are for improvements, especially improved processes, because you know better than anyone what those internal processes were that you've used, and your recommendations for improvement. So we're also going to target specific individuals, folks that have participated on panels in the past to support your reviews, folks that you have interviewed in developing your reviews. And in addition, we'd like to, as much as we can, target certain council members, people like Susan Tatayan, Randy Fiorini, Jessica Pearson, in terms of the executive officer and staff. So that's still ambitious, but we will try to get as many of those interviews in as we can before the August meeting, and just present very draft findings at your August meeting to all of you and the new board members. So that's the plan for August. We'll continue that work beyond the August meeting, get your feedback at the August meeting, interview any remaining continuing ISB members that we haven't interviewed yet, get the questionnaire out, continue the targeted interviews. Potentially, we'll see what all of you think, if we can piggyback on the stakeholder meeting or stakeholder panelists that you're planning, I think for now September, or maybe it's October, November, September, October, I'm not sure. Anyway, then take a look and analyze the data, revise the findings, present it to you later this year, maybe November. Get your feedback and try to finalize the report by the end of the year. We'll see how it goes if that extends. beyond. But that's our plan. And oh, one of the other ideas is that Chelsea had, and maybe she can talk about this if you're interested, is to kind of have, if we have the time and ability, start with this initial questionnaire, take a look at the responses, and that may give us a really good idea of folks to follow up with for interviews later, or even a second type of questionnaire, depending on what makes sense. But maybe we'll learn of folks that really loved one of your reviews that we didn't know about. So we may want to follow up more in depth with them, or on the other hand, people that really have certain thoughts about for improvements and didn't appreciate a certain review. So so we'll use the initial data to help inform that. So I'll stop there, see if there's any questions or comments.
Lauren, this is Tom Holzer. I have a comment, and it gets to the Chelsea's suggestion of sort of doing the questionnaire maybe in 2 stages. When I compiled the results from the questionnaire for the water supply reliability, one of the problems I had was, of course, in a questionnaire, very often you give a multiple choice answer, choices. And what created a problem were those choices that were sort of in the middle, the somewhats and the, you couldn't tell whether they were negative or positive about something. And there were a lot of people in that category, and that sort of neutralized the effectiveness of the questionnaire because you couldn't tell whether you were getting a positive response or a negative response. So paying attention to that challenge, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and we did talk about that a little bit on this call we had, and one idea I had, and then I'll leave it to Chelsea. But one idea I had is, I've been involved way back in the CalFed days with proposal reviews, and I actually don't remember who it was, but we got advice on how to set up the ratings for proposal reviews. And one of the advice we got was set up bins. Don't do a quantitative score, but set up bins. But only set up 4 bins, because with 4 bins, there's no middle. So you kind of force the choice of above or below that middle point, which, sees which way people are leaning. So that's one way to do it. And I don't know, Chelsea, if you have some other thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you. This is an important point, and definitely something to think about. A couple impressions that I've just started initially looking through some of the questionnaires that you've used in the past. And I think that what the suggestion that Lauren just offered is definitely one way around this, kind of forcing a choice, forcing people to take a stand. Another aspect is you have to be really careful with the wording of the actual prompt that you give people. Sometimes if a statement has multiple components, people might agree with one component but disagree with another one, and so they're not really sure if they should agree or disagree, and so that'll put them into the middle. And so just being really careful and intentional with the way that you word questions. The other thing that I wanted to mention is if there were a lot of people who were indicating those kind of neutral responses, that would be, to me, a really key reason to do a second round of interviews, because then you can actually follow up and probe those neutral responses a little bit more to understand what they do mean. Is it that they just are not aware what the issue, that they just they're aware of it, but they don't have an opinion about it, they have mixed feelings? That's really the value of interview data, is that it allows you to dig in a little bit deeper to questions that are raised by the more quantitative metrics that you get on the survey.
Karen, I just want to say I'm really glad you're doing this, and thanks for the update. I think it will be really valuable for us. I appreciate the challenges you face, and that some of those are evaluations are probably relatively simple. We are given a science plan, we review it, make recommendations, and they're incorporated into the next version. I think other ones are going to be far more challenging when you think about just as one example, publishing an article on adaptive management in a journal, and what the impact of that would be, because there's a lot of people that read those theoretically, and how it influences their work is much more diffuse. I think, to get back to looking at specific questions and so forth, I think if you couch this whole thing in the context of how can the board be more effective, what can we do to improve our process to be more effective and more, and put that positive spin on it. Then when you ask questions, it's not so much saying, well, that didn't work and this didn't work, but that might have worked. It's more like, what can we do to improve the process? What new things we can do? And I refer you back to the retreat that we held probably 3 or 4 years ago, where we did do a questionnaire, and we also had a panel. And our particular goal was to try and ask the stakeholders and panelists, what can we do to be more effective?
Yeah.
And from that came recommendations about having a prospectus that is has public review and input. The 2-pagers and a variety of things came out of that really did help to improve our process. So you might go back to the people we had as panelists there and the answers to the questions, because we got a lot of good advice from those questions at that particular time. It wasn't done scientifically. It was done to try and extract as much information and ideas that we could get out of the stakeholder and user communities.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, I forgot to mention that 2 times you guys have kind of done your own look back. That one that resulted in developing a prospectus first, and then later you did another look back with some panelists, and that resulted in the summary sheet idea for helping with outreach. So yeah, and I like your question of that kind of overall focus on what can the board do to be more effective. So I like that.
And just to point out that when we did the first retreat, we sent out questionnaires and we got responses about ways to improve our products and improve our outreach. It would be worth going back and looking to see how many of those things we actually tried to do.
That's a good idea. Kind of do an assessment on that.
Yes, I'd like to add the comment that I have consistently been a little bit concerned that we have depended on reviews, depended on others' input, and not sort of said, what are our criteria? So we are an independent science board. Our job is to say what we think. And, in some sense, there ought to be some other process that gets what everybody else thinks. And then we ought to be doing, what does the independent science board think? And yeah, that's just an overall concern with the review process, interview process.
Yeah. Well, and just to be clear, I am planning to contact each of you board members. I'm going to start with those that are departing, but one-on-one or with the team I'm working with Chelsea and Edmund to get your input, because that's going to be really valuable. And I've received some input from some of you already, which I appreciate.
As a suggestion, Lauren, this might be a really good opportunity to involve some of the new board members, have them involved in interviews, have them involved in some of the writing. Let their first review perhaps be a review of the past board.
That's an idea. What do you all think of that? Especially considering you've got some social scientists. I was already thinking of seeking help from them potentially with this project.
Every board member has a history of reviewing science programs.
Yeah.
So just a social science activity.
Yeah. What do others think about Jay's idea?
I won't have to do it.
Yeah, but we'll see your grade.
Yeah, I guess I would just reiterate, maybe it was Steve who brought it up, to focus on how to make the board's activities and products be more effective. So not so much a focus on grading the present or past board members, but thinking ahead to how to improve for the future. I mean, I think we were all well-intentioned in wanting our work to be effective, and if there are opportunities to improve on that, I would very much like to see those be implemented with the new board members.
My suggestion is mostly perhaps a way of engaging the new board members in what will be their future.
And also you're saying this because you're staying on the board.
Maybe.
All right. Well,
I would have the new board members be involved in this process. Where has-beens.
Just real quickly, one other thing that I thought about is when you use the word effective, what does that mean? And the challenge always is, what are the metrics? What are the things you can actually measure to evaluate that? So that's another challenge we have. And I think we're going to end up using a lot of kind of perception of value metrics. But
yeah, I think that will be a challenging part of the process. But I look forward to seeing the results from this assessment.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Lauren, I don't know that effective is the right word. You're looking for impact of the board. So
yeah. Well, yeah, actually the terms I've been, that was Steve's word. I was using value and impact. It's just kind of perceived value and then actual impact. But
yeah. Well, for example, it might give some insight to what activities have been most impactful. And that might be a guide for how board time and resources are allocated in the future.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So let's see, any other questions from the board for either Lauren or John Callaway? If not, are there any questions or comments from the public, Edmund?
There are none.
All right, thanks again. We look forward to your update in August and to working with you on this effort.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so our next agenda item will be updates and discussion of current Delta ISB activities. And we're going to reserve public comment on these activities until we finish with the updates. So the first review that we'll discuss is the ecosystems review with a focus on non-native species. And just as a little bit of background, a draft of this review was posted as part of the meeting package for the Delta ISB's meeting on June 12th. Since that time, the review has been revised to address comments that were submitted by Delta ISB members, as well as individual comments from the public. The revised and updated review is also a part of the meeting package for today. So I will turn things over to Steve Brandt and John Weens to give us an update and an overview of the revisions.
Well, let me just start, and then I'll turn it over to John. The history, the short history of this is that we started the review, and our first part of the effort was to really go through the literature, particularly with Madison's help, and I think all of you provided input on references and so forth. And Madison even wrote a draft literature review on the topic, and then Joy added a tremendous amount to that. And we really had a fairly elaborate, detailed literature review at some stage. It was a little bit disjunct, and there were some things that were done in great depth and some maybe not so much great depth, but there was a lot of literature reviewed. And when we started looking at some of the recommendations that came out of that, when you take it to that level, there's a tremendous number of sort of detailed recommendations, I might add, that are taxa specific or location specific or even project specific. And there's just a lot that can be done. So after looking at that, we rewrote it and kept a lot of that stuff in there in various sections, but also really expanded on looking at a sort of a higher level, what needs to be done at a higher level. That's kind of the version you all got and provided comments on over the past month or so. We also got a lot of very extensive and individual comments from our panelists and a few other individuals. And in essence, there was, I don't know that there was a lot of disagreement into our recommendations, but there was clearly a lot of comments that related to the fact that it appeared disjointed. It appeared there were uneven components to it, some of it in great depth and in the literature, but some of it more in less depth. There was some confusion about mixing the science and the policy issues, and also a matter of style and emphasis. So in essence, with all of those comments, and they were all very valuable, part of that was stemmed from being a cut and paste job, I think, in terms of the various parts we had each written. We completely redrafted it. And the new version that's out for you now is taking account of all of the comments, pretty much 98% of the comments and edits we received, but also really redrafting it in so that each section has a flow from findings to the text to specific recommendations. And we took a lot of the detailed taxonomic kinds of discussions of things going on in the Delta, put that all into about a 10-page appendix. And I think it reads much more nicely and flow, and the recommendations there's some change in the nature of recommendations, but one of the ones that would be noted is clearly a separation of sort of the policy science integration recommendations to ones that relate specifically to the science related to a particular topic. So where we're at now is we're looking to move forward and try and get your agreement to put this out for a 30-day official public comment. That would give all of you another 30 days to have a chance to another review, public comment, to have a look at it and get their evaluations in, and then see where we are at the end of that. We could end up just saying this looks pretty good and revise a little bit of it and go for approval, or we could end up having to do another major revision and another public comment if we have to. Right now, we're looking forward to try and go through a formal 30-day public comment and to get any feedback that you've had a chance to get in the last with the last read in the last few days. John, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think you've done a good job of summarizing where we are. I don't have a lot to add. I think we've been banging this around for a considerable length of time, and I think what we have now is something that has at least a logical organization and a flow that a reader can follow from one point to the next. And I think we've got a lot of recommendations in there. My own view is that we probably need to trim the recommendations down and highlight some major recommendations and not mix large recommendations with very specific recommendations. But I think it's ready for prime time to get comments, so that particularly so that those of us who are leaving the board have a chance to have a parting shot at this. And I don't think we can get it done before we leave the board, which was our original aspiration. But I think we can get it to the point where it is a product that is really ready for final deliberations by the boards in September, October, and certainly try to get it out and done by then. And I think, speaking for myself, and when I go off the board, I'll be happy to continue to chip in on this, as Joy has done since she went off the board. So I think there's a considerable interest in getting this done and in producing something that really has an impact. Invasive species are a major problem in the Delta, as they are just about everywhere. It is difficult to come up with the sort of the science tool that will take care of everything. But I think we've provided some guidance, particularly in terms of how managers, policy makers, the public should begin thinking about the problem of invasive species. It's easy just to attach labels to things, but I think thinking more carefully about exactly what we mean by invasive species and how we ought to prioritize efforts and where we ought to put our emphasis on invasive species, recognizing that there's going to be a lot of flux going on in the Delta, species coming and going, and we can't deal with all of them. So we have to decide where best to put our efforts and how to be proactive in dealing with that. And I think that's sort of the thrust of where we're headed in this report.
Well, thank you both. Any comments or questions from members of the board? But I guess both about where we are in the process and maybe your thoughts about putting this review out for public comment.
Liz, I have a few comments. One, it is much better or much more readable now. And I was impressed with the improvements that I saw in it. My main concern is sort of an overarching philosophical one. And I mean, John just referred to the problem of invasives, or referred to invasives as a problem. And I think if you step back far enough, invasives aren't really a problem. If I learned anything from the panels, it was that we really don't have any pristine environments anymore. And most environments now are, in fact, managed by humans. And that's certainly the case of the Delta. So that I think that perspective doesn't come out in the report early on. It's still like, you know, here's a nutria and we have to worry about that, and we certainly do. But it's more a question of managing these systems. And then this sort of gets to a second problem. And I thought the report did a good job of talking about climate change, but it comes fairly late in the report. And if you stop to think about it, not only are we managing these systems, but the system is non-stationary. It's evolving over time. And we as a board might do a much better job of focusing on that problem, because it actually comes up in all the reviews that we're actively doing right now. It's a big part of the water supply review. It was part of the needs assessment. It was a big part of, in fact, it was the motivator for Dick's effort with rapid change. And it's such a big problem that I think we as a board we don't even see it, is maybe one way of saying it. So that I think bringing that out in these reports is going to become important. And I don't know how you solve that problem of climate change, because we don't know where we're headed. We just know that big changes are likely. And to do all these management remediations and all really doesn't accomplish much if sea level rises, 10 feet and destroys everything that we did. All we've bought is a few decades of time. And I think we as a board need to start trying to figure out how we're going to address that problem and give advice to both the legislature and the science program on what really needs to be done.
Hi, Tom, thanks for your comments. I really, we really tried to get that in here, and apparently we may not have said it explicitly enough. We have a whole section on sort of ecosystems and non-native species, and which includes the climate change stuff. And I think our purpose was to more or less say exactly what you just said, is that we need to start thinking this as a continually evolving ecosystem, and we called it a dynamic species pool in one sense. And so any way we can strengthen that in here or highlighted it, please give us some suggestions.
Well, it has to be sooner in the document. It's almost like the third major topic that you get to. In fact, I was beginning to get antsy about it because I didn't realize you were going to get there. And then you did, and I thought, wow, well, they talk about it and it's discussed, but it's far enough into the report that I'm not sure it will hit the reader over the head. And it could be worded more emphatically, because I'm slowly gravitating to this as those two issues as the really big problem. The rest of the stuff is, it's just not at the same scale as those two problems: the human management of the system and climate change wiping out everything we do.
I might comment that we try in the first part of the paper to establish a framework for thinking about species moving in and out of ecosystems in terms of the dynamics of the species pool that are going on. I think your comment indicates that we need to couple that much more explicitly with the dynamics of the environment that are going on, and with rapid change, with climate change, with these driving forces behind it, rather than simply mentioning them and having them as one label in a box diagram, to really dig into them in more detail and talk up front about the implications of that. Because you're right, that is the context in which the future is going to be played out. Things are going to be in turmoil, and I think the challenge for management, quite beyond managing those effects of climate change, managing the products of those in terms of species coming and going, requires much more attention, and that's where the focus in the future needs to be, rather than looking at things as they've actually, after the fact, after they've happened and when they're out of control. So coupling it more directly with those driving forces may be upfront, may be a way to deal with that.
Yeah, that was a perfect answer to my concern.
Other comments, questions?
In my extra spare time in confinement these days, a couple of weeks ago, I had a chance to read this interesting book by Dan Egan on the Great Lakes and the history of the ecosystems of the Great Lakes, and how they've been completely turned upside down several times by invasive species. I thought that might be a really useful, I mentioned this to Steve the other day, might be a very useful kind of box or thread to put into this kind of discussion, sort of as an example of, here's how, if we don't address this issue effectively, it really can turn the whole system upside down in lots of different productive ways.
Yeah, Jay, I would suggest that you draft a one-page box for us, and we'll put it in there.
I might.
Did I see other hands up before? Vince.
Yeah, I think given the fact that that John is going off the board, Jay has already gone off the board. This is really a very, very good article so far, a very, very good report. And maybe we take a week to see if John and Steve want to do something in terms of answering Tom's criticism. Although, I'm not really sure how you're gonna deal with that, because it is so overwhelming and it is so uncertain. But again, bringing that up front and then go ahead and getting it out for public review. I think it's more important now with the timing of people leaving the board, new board members coming on, because there will be some overlap, as John said. But getting public comment is very important right now.
And also, both Steve and John can be getting input from members of the board concurrently. So it doesn't mean that we're finished giving input, but just that we can have additional board input, but also an opportunity to get feedback from the public. So.
Yeah, I would advocate moving ahead as quickly as we can with getting public comment. I think further tuning is not going to have that much impact on how the public perceives it. I think the members of the board are much more deeply involved in this and arguably more perceptive about the problems that we're dealing with. So I think you're right. We can be working on these two things simultaneously rather than delaying the public release of it, hoping that we get something that is more perfect.
I think Dick had a comment.
Right. Part of the process of reviewing with the public is educating the public and having the public educate us. It's a two-way process. And on that basis, I would argue we should put the rapid change material overlay up front before we send it out to the public, because our job is to educate the public, and the review process is part of that educational process.
So maybe we could have just a, I don't know, again, a 1 week or so period of time to allow John and Steve to address that comment, and as well as other comments that may have come in from board members, and then move it out to public comment as soon as possible. So we'll have an opportunity for that feedback at our August meeting. Are folks amenable to that approach?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, except that if we push it out a week, which I'm in favor of, we can't have a 30-day public comment and have comments back before our August meeting, because that'll be past August 14th. But I do think trying to address that more upfront, as Tom said, and Dick seconded, is a reasonable idea. I had one quick question, because Edmund suggested we all should read the prospectus, which I just did yesterday, from almost 2 years ago, I guess. Did we do interviews and questionnaires, or was it boiled down to the panels, as I recall? I just didn't see any evidence of any input in terms of questionnaires or interviews in the document.
No, we didn't. As far as I recall, we did the panels and then went back and forth with the panels through the process.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
no.
I think that's fine. That, you know, we just want to be clear about the process that was used.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at this and just think about how we could, I mean, in one sense, it could just be a reshuffling of the sections to get that section up more further up, and then maybe somehow emphasize it a little bit more. I don't know how smoothly that will be in terms of the flow, because we first talk about the individual species approach, which is the current common approach of doing things. And then we go into the ecosystem, and then the ecosystem and adaptive management. There may be a way to do that. The alternative just coming to mind is maybe to put together an executive summary that is really just a page that would just emphasize that. I don't know if we can get into all of our recommendations there, but emphasize basically what Tom's talking about, is that, you know, we need to move beyond individual species, and that the ecosystem approach in the context of a changing environment, et cetera, is where it's at. And put that as an overview. It wouldn't actually be an executive summary. I just appreciating what Terry or what Tracy just said about trying to get this out so that our comments are back before our next meeting. And John, how long do you think we can turn this around in a slightly different format in a day or two?
Yeah, I think, I've been thinking about this, and I think what we need to do, instead of moving that section, I think pull out some of the underlying points of that section, dress it up a little bit with some of the thinking that's gone on in the rapid change discussions, and put very early in the report that kind of context, that we're going to talk about invasive species, changes in the species pool, but this all needs to be placed with an understanding of this mega concept that is really governing everything that we talk about in these systems, and spending a page and a half really kind of describing the components of rapid change, the driving forces of rapid change, and how that feeds into the changes in the species pool, and therefore into what we label invasive and what we don't label invasive. I think that would basically alert readers right at the outset to that broader context of megadynamics of the system. And I think that's something that could be done within, certainly, well, speaking for myself, I think we could have something drafted by Sunday or Monday that would deal with that. And if we are able to get this out very quickly, even if it's not as polished as we might want it to be, then we can perhaps meet that deadline of having the 30 days under our belt.
Yeah, it seems if we talk about the invasive species in the context of the other driving forces in the system, which we have mentioned here and there throughout the process, and we could put that section you're talking about either as a preface before we talk about introduction rationale, or right after that, just before the invasive process, and it might fit nicely into there. And
yeah, I think we can do it. I think we can certainly give it a shot. And I think if we give it a shot, then it's out there. It's sort of is at least an attempt to deal with the concerns that Tom and Dick have raised, and Tracy, about this. And we can give it a go.
yeah, if by we, me, you mean you, I'm all for it.
Well, I was thinking that the we was more you, but
I got taxes.
We can do it. I can take a stab at it and send it to you.
That sounds good.
But the stab will be just that, and it will release a lot of blood that you then need to clean up.
I suppose you could send it to Tom as well, I think.
Yeah, I'd love to look at it. John has certainly captured my concerns, and I think the way he wants to address it would come a long ways, because what you want to do is get the big picture first and then get into the details. I think the flow of the document as it's currently written is fine. It's just, it takes a while to get the big picture out of this story.
Yeah. So it sounds like we have a strategy that John and Steve and maybe Tom will work on this front section to kind of set the stage for rapid change in the Delta, and how that setting, is an additional driver in the context of ecosystem change and invasive species. And then the idea will be for the document to go out for public comment, but also during the public comment period, there can also be feedback from board members. And we can, hopefully we'll have 30 days, but if we don't, maybe we can put some language out that says, there is a 30-day window for comment, but comments that are submitted prior to our next board meeting would be, strongly appreciated, or something to that nature. How does that sound for everybody?
It's good.
Okay. I think I either got nods or thumbs up from everybody. All right. So we have a way forward with the ecosystems review. So let's move on to the monitoring enterprise review, and Vince will give us an update on that.
Thank you, Liz. Okay, in terms of the questionnaires, we received 34 completed questionnaires, and we have reviewed all of the comments, as Lauren suggested with the review of our reviews and reports. We have used this to look at some of the interview questions that we're going to ask, and also to add people that we will interview for the report. Cheryl Patel and Chelsea Batavia will be working together on the questionnaire analysis. They're currently organizing the data to run more in-depth analysis through the SPSS statistical package. They're also creating summary statistic visuals that will provide an overview of the responses, particularly for the Likert scale questions and their associated comments. I would add that in our previous questionnaires, for example, the IEP and the water quality, we tended to not use those neutral. In other words, we were kind of forcing the two extremes to look at what people's comments were. So as I mentioned, we've used the comments to develop a series of questions to ask during the interviews. These have been circulated to the lead authors for their comments, additions, and edits. We've asked them each to read the draft report that John and I went back and forth with, which is inclusive with the exception of information from the interviews and from the questionnaire. And the recommendations, of course, are in very, very rough form with a lot of points that we could consider. And I know some of you feel very strongly that if 10 commandments were enough, we shouldn't have more than 10 recommendations. And I admit we're already up to 17. So some of those probably will be filtered down. The Delta Science Program staff will be checking our availability for the interviews. And our plan is to have at least 2 of the lead authors on each of the interviews that we do. We also would welcome, as we've done in the past, having other members of the board serve on these interviews because it would be very, very helpful. And Edmund, Chelsea, and Cheryl will also be helping with that. So again, let's say one of the action items for Edmund is if we could announce that we really would like other board members to participate in the reviews like we've had in the past, because this review certainly will go longer than August. Okay, that's my report on the monitoring enterprise.
Any comments or questions for Vince? Thanks for the update and for continuing to move that review forward. And yes, I encourage board members to try to engage in the interview process. I know for our past reviews, it's been helpful to have all or most members of the board involved in the interviews.
And Liz, I think it'd be especially appropriate for people that are continuing on the board to take part if at all possible.
Sounds good. Let's go on to water supply reliability, and Jay will give the update on that review.
Yes, we have been working very hard. We have an initial draft now in circulation to the ISB members, trying to get their assessment of what we've written so far. It's still pretty rough in some places, but we look forward to hearing what you all think. This is, again, there's going to be another review that spans between boards, which I think is a good thing. It's a way of educating the new board members on things that they probably haven't seen about the system in terms of water supply reliability. So we look forward to seeing all of your comments. Hopefully this month or early in August, so that we can incorporate them in a new revision.
Joe, do you want to add anything?
No, I think Jay summarized well. So we have been working quite closely recently on this just to come to a good draft. So still there are rough edges, but this will be a good starting point.
Excellent. Yeah, it's nice to have a product for the, sort of to engage the rest of the board in. So thank you for providing that that draft. And as I recall, we've asked board members to provide feedback by, I think it's July 28th. So you should be hearing from board members soon. Okay. So the next presentation will be an update from Steve Brandt and Dick Norgard about the science needs assessment. And I'm going to just give just a brief background as we go into the discussion of the science needs assessment. So based on the endorsement of DPIC and recommendations from the Delta ISB, the Delta Stewardship Council is in the process of developing a science needs assessment as part of the Delta Science and Funding and Governance Initiative. So today we're going to receive 2 updates on the science needs assessment. We'll have an update from Dick Norgard on his efforts to prepare a journal article on the topic of ecology during rapid environmental change. And the idea is that the effort that Dick is leading and this publication will help inform the science needs assessment. And then for the second part, we'll have a presentation from Steve Brandt. So Steve will be providing an update to DPIC at their July 13th meeting on Monday. And so he's going to share his presentation with the board today, both to inform us and to maybe get any feedback from the board. So let's start with an update from Dick on the ecology during rapid environmental change journal article.
Okay, so the update is pretty short. My efforts have been distracted by various medical issues going on, but I'm back on it. And at this point, it's actually in John Ween's hands, but he's been distracted again by rewriting the invasive species report. So I'm not sure when I'll get word back from John. And then we're about at that stage ready to expand it to the original members of the rapid change subgroup. And I think we will have something out to the full board by the August meeting, but it has been delayed, but the process is underway. Yeah,
I might add that Dick's right. It's in my court right now, and I've been working away on it the last few days. My problem is that I am, as I pointed out to Dick, constitutionally unable to take something and just tweak it here and there. So I'm adding things and refiguring things, and I'll send that back to Dick, who will add things and delete things and rejigger things. But at some point, we need to bring this to a close, and I hope that with the next iteration of it, we can pass it on to other members of the writing team and then on to the board as a whole, because things are rapidly changing and we need to deal with rapid change.
Okay. Thank you, John and Dick. So now let's go on to Steve, and he'll share the presentation that he's planning to provide at the DPIC meeting on Monday.
Okay, while Edmund is getting that ready, these will be the slides that I'll be presenting at DPIC, but what I'll say is more tailored to the board here. We thought it was time that we've given very brief updates on our activity So we thought it was time to give you just a little bit more elaborate update on kind of the things we're thinking about and the progress that's being made. And then, even though I know a lot of you have been participating in our discussions, Edmund, are you sharing your slides yet?
Yeah, I'm in the process of sharing. Sorry, a little delay in getting it up. Do you see it on the screen?
Not yet. There we go. Okay, so this is what we're looking at is trying to develop an effective long-term science needs assessment, and it's focused on the workshop. You can go to the next slide. I think most of you know what the origins of this are, and that was it was triggered by the letter that we put together to DPIC in February of 2019, where we really talked and made the suggestion that we really need a strategic science needs assessment in the context of rapidly and changing environment. And that a second component of that was to ask the question of whether or not our science funding and government were capable of handling what we expect to be more complex, forward-looking, proactive research. And I will mention that we're doing that in parallel with the work that dealing with the discussion paper and the scientific panels to explore the preemptive science needs in the context of rapid environmental change, and that we did submit to DPIC a memo to that effect that summarizes that activity back in April. The next slide is we have a planning team that is now 17 members. Dick has joined us on this, and Edmund, note to you to add Dick's name onto this before Monday. And it really is we have a variety of folks on here. It's been a planning team that's been working on this for about a year now. And the next slide sort of outlines what our overall goal was, is to it's co-hosted by DPIC and the Science Board with help from the Council. We completed an advanced briefing paper, which was designed to give a background to our workshop to workshop attendees. Originally scheduled a workshop in late April. Now we're rescheduling it for sometime in October. And the thought was, in the context of COVID, was to keep the momentum going by taking the 4 topics that we had designed for our workshop and spanning those out into 4 workshop discussions that would be in a preface to our actual workshop in October. The next slide. We again have 2 fundamental goals, and the first is to identify the key science efforts that will provide answers and insights for likely management questions in the long term. And then the second is discuss how to organize the science enterprise to address these complex and changing problems. As an aside, the Science Action Agenda has also started its activities, and their timeline is to start now and to end their work by the end of next year. And we want to make sure that these 2 efforts to let folks know that they are different efforts but complementary, and that the work that we complete and the science needs assessment will be feed in to the Science Action Agenda. The way I've been approaching it is that thinking about it as calling the science needs assessment as a strategic science needs assessment. And what do we need to begin now? What kind of science do we need now to meet long-term management goals? And that maybe the Science Action Agenda can be looked at as more tactical. What's needed right now over the next couple of years, and that we can do with our existing science structure. And also, as an aside, we can, if we think about this, if you look at, for example, just how salmon flow or how flows affect salmon habitat, there's a lot of research that's required right now to look at how we can adjust flow rates and how they will affect temperatures and salmon habitat right now in the Delta. But as climate change comes, we know there's going to be rising sea levels. There's going to be changes in the absolute temperatures. There's also going to be changes in the onset and duration of the seasonal warming, and how those affect salmon, and how those the tactics that we develop now, will they even be useful in the future in the context of those major changes in environmental conditions. And we're going to need some science predictive tools in order to even look at what management might be considered in the future. So in essence, the management question hasn't changed, but how management might address those questions are going to change fundamentally in the context of that changing climate structure. Anyway, the next slide. So the 4 topics that we're talking about are very simple, really. What do we know about the projected climate change impacts? Our focus is on the climate change for the Delta. If we know those projected climate change impacts, what questions will that raise for management, and what will managers need to know? Given that, what kind of science do we need to address those management questions? And then ultimately, in order to do the science, what changes are needed in the science governance, funding, and integration to accomplish those science objectives? So we've been holding those workshops, and the first workshop on the next slide was held on April 28th, and John Callaway gave a nice presentation on what are the expected changes for climate change, and particularly he pointed out that some of the major impacts are going to be increased air and water temperatures, precipitation and runoff changes, extreme events, also sea level rise. There was a lot of discussion about what is the most appropriate time frame to be looking at. And I think the way I would conclude it is that it's really all time frames. Some of those climate change impacts are occurring almost as we speak, and other ones will be more frequent, more prevalent down the road, but it's a continual change and evolving change in the ecosystem. The other factors, such as all the other driving factors, invasive species, land use, contaminants, are also important to consider in the context of this climate-driven change and the human and social responses as well. The science might need to focus on the impacts we already know are going to happen with respect to water quality, such as increased temperatures, salinity intrusions, dissolved oxygens, habitat and species, how the various changes in temperature and salinity are going to affect those habitats, and then the human impacts, which is everything from water supply to levee failures to flooding risks, things like that. The other thing we're holding the next slide on in each of these discussion groups is I guess it's called a Mentometer process. Is that the right terminology? Where we're asking the participants a variety of questions and giving them a chance to provide input. This first workshop, I believe we had well over 80 participants. One of the questions we asked was, is there any science missing that we need to discuss? And this, I won't read all of these, but this is just a subset of the type of responses we received. For resource management, for example, what are the changes to hydrodynamic and flow technologies? What's the relative importance of extreme events? External water demand, how that's going to change. If we go to the biological things, the onset and duration of seasonal warming are clearly going to have changes in the biology. Are there tipping points? We all recognize that those changes in habitat and temperatures are also going to affect the invasiveness, invasive species. And then the human response relates to a variety of things, population and land use change and so forth. But this is the kind of details we're getting through a series of questions we're asking during each of these discussion groups. The next discussion group on the next slide, we said, okay, now that we recognize these are some of the changes that the Delta is going to experience, what does that mean to management? So we invited 3 individuals State Water Contractor, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and Delta San Joaquin Delta Conservancy, Campbell, and asked them from their perspective, and some of their responses stressed we need, well, excuse me, what we asked them is what will decision makers and stakeholders need to know in the future? And some of the responses suggested we need community buy-in and support. Strong science needs to guide prioritization of funds. Collaboratively develop overarching set of, I want to say, strategic management questions to guide Delta science. We need to address uncertainties to unlock necessary research questions and focus more research and resources on flow to create scientifically rigorous strategy for Delta conservation. I might add that I believe, and Edmund can correct me if I'm wrong, that these discussions have been taped, and I think they can be viewed. The participant input from that series is on the next slide. In this case, in the second discussion group, we had over 100 people participating. And we asked the question, what kind of information would be useful to decision makers to help achieve the co-equal goals? And here's just a summary of some of those answers that we got. Clearly, the need for synthesis. There's a lot of people that suggested we need forecasting, iterative short-term forecasting, quantitative forecasting and prediction tools, and synergistic effects of changes. A lot of responses related to prioritization. How do we effectively prioritize and invest in Delta ecosystem function? And then there were some other inputs related to things like social science perspective and using the Delta as an experiment. The next slide. Our next discussion is going to be where we have Luis Conrad, Stephanie Fong, and Mike Czakowski. We're asking the question to the scientists and saying what science then is needed to support the management needs that you heard about in the last discussion. And then how is your science program preparing for future changes? What would you do differently? And do you have strategic research goals or products that you're working on to meet manager strategic plans? That will be held. They're all held at, I believe it's at, I don't remember the time, 9 or 9:30 in the morning on July 28th. That will be the third of our fourth discussion group. And then the last slide, just as a summary of where we are time-wise, is we will hold our final discussion on September 9th. And then we had planned to hold our science needs assessment workshop on October 5th and 6th, but we are looking at it a little more broadly and now and thinking about, do we want to hold a workshop over 2 full days or expand it out over a week? And what's the best way that we can make use of our time to really integrate and expand on discussions and particularly get feedback from stakeholders? That's one of our primary goals. Our work is planned to be finished with a report on in early January. We do plan to have our recommendations feed into the science action agenda. The idea is anything that's produced in a strategic science framework will certainly have immediate applicability. And also there are things that we need to do now in terms of getting the science started and getting the governance in place so that we can be more effective in our science in the future. So that will hopefully guide what as an input to one of the to the science action agenda as well. So that's sort of where we're up to right now. And any comments, thoughts, questions?
That was really helpful, Steve. I'm really impressed by the approach that the group has taken. And I think the idea to have these discussion seminars as a way of continuing the momentum and sort of moving into the workshop in the fall, it has been, really helpful for keeping everyone engaged and thinking about this important issue. So I will open up questions to board members. questions or comments on the direction and the activities that that Steve and Jay and Dick have been involved in.
Yeah, Jay or Dick, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that was quite complete.
That was a great presentation, Steve, review of what's going on. I would like to see us make some efforts to include new board members on the planning and writing up of the strategic needs assessment, because I think it's going to be the new board that really sees this through over the coming decade, which will be their decade.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the recommendations that are the report that comes out of this will have some topics that I think will be ripe for the new board to look at in terms of review topics.
But I'd like to see them engaged in actually writing it. I think that way they'll be in a better position to take ownership of it, hopefully.
So is this a board document or DSP document when it comes out finally?
I actually thought it was a DPIC effort where we're feeding into it, but it would be helpful to have that clarified.
I think the way we've been looking at it is, the DPIC, it's a joint effort between DPIC and the science board with council input. So they are the ones who sanctioned us to move forward with this, and as part of the 4-part effort, the other 3 parts dealing with funding and initiatives and so forth. So, and Amanda, of course, has been very much helping us lead this whole effort. So from DPIC. So.
Yeah, I'll just add in. I think that's how that's within the council. That's how it's seen as well, as it's a joint effort with DPIC. DPIC endorsed, independent science board led, and then the science program and the council staff supporting wherever possible, and integrated, just as you said, Steve, with those other aspects of the science and governance initiative.
I think that's right. And as a science board led effort, I think we should take the leadership in the writing of it, including the new board members in that process.
Okay. Any other comments or feedback? I think that's a really nice presentation, Steve, and I think it will be very effective at the DPIC meeting on Monday. Okay. All right. I guess nothing further on that item for now. So the final update will be from Vince, and he'll bring us up to date on the review of the interagency ecological program.
Well, there's not much to report. We've not heard anything back from Steve Culberson or Stephanie Fong about the meeting with the IEP directors. We mentioned in last month's meeting, they're hoping that we'll come up with some organizational structure for them to bring to the IEP directors. We're still looking at joint powers authority, but as Dick pointed out at the last board meeting, we've not wanted to tell them what to do, and that's been one of the conflicts, because they've come back and said that's what they want, to have like a straw man. Now, Tracy, you were going to get in touch with Stephanie. Have you heard anything from her?
I decided I want to wait till I see what we get from some of Edmund's efforts. I checked with him. He's been a little overwhelmed these days, but I want to have a couple of things from what he's doing for us to go to Stephanie with. Okay. But I will tweak her definitely.
Yeah, so that's where we are with that.
Okay. Any questions for Vince? Not too much to update there, but I'm glad the conversation is still happening. Let's see. Okay, so before we end our update session, I was going to see are there any comments from members of the public on any of these activities that the board is engaged in?
There are none, but I just want to respond to one of Steve's questions for me on whether the videos are recorded and posted. They are, and they're on the council's YouTube site, and we'll cross-post it. And they're also on the events calendar too, for each event.
Great. And no public comment, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. No public comments.
Okay. All right, so that moves us into agenda item 6, which is preparation for upcoming Delta ISB meetings. As all of you know, we're still planning to have future meetings be remote to basically keep up with the state's response to COVID-19. But the question of remote meetings will be revisited on a month-by-month basis. At this time, we've decided to go forward with a remote meeting in August. And so before we get into the August meeting agenda, I thought it might be useful to think about how to have remote meetings be effective, and also maybe thoughts from the board about how to build relationships amongst the new board members. So we've all had the benefit of having worked together for several years before we moved into this remote format. And as you know, I think that those personal interactions have been they're very important in terms of building trust between board members and trust and respect and allowing the board to work effectively. So I thought it might be useful to think about if board meetings are going to continue certainly into the next several months on a remote basis. Are there strategies or tools that could be used to make those meetings more effective, and whether you have ideas for ways of building collaboration and building relationships between the new board members. I don't really provide some documents about best practices that maybe some of you had a chance to take a look at. So I think, did I see, Vince, did I see your hand up?
One of the things, because we've been having so many personal Zoom meetings on family issues and things, is meetings that are shorter and more focused, I think are much, much better. We're not going to be a full 3 hours today, but I think that's one of the issues. Certainly when we talked to Lauren about the review of reviews, it was a shorter meeting. It was very focused. There was a lot more interaction. So that would be one thing I would suggest.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think Zoom fatigue is a very real issue. And so just being aware of that is important. Tracy, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to follow up on what Vince was saying. So what you're suggesting, Vince, is to break up ISB into a series of shorter Zoom calls. And I agree with that. I think this Zoom is working really well. I mean, it really, to me, it feels like we're all in the same room, essentially. I'm not having any issues with our ability to communicate or to express ourselves. But I do think that what Vince suggested about potentially breaking things up and not trying to have because if you look at like a 6-hour block for our August meeting, that's a long time for me to be sitting in this chair. So. Yeah,
we have built-in breaks into the August meeting, but it will be long, and we have also tried to remove some agenda items to reduce the.
But I think what Vince is saying is for an August meeting, we don't need to target 2 days, right? We could target a whole week. We could do 2 hours 5 days a week or something. I mean, that's as a way to come in and be sharp on the subject at hand.
Right.
I don't know, just something to think about.
Yeah, Tracy, I mean, I think what you brought out about, we are interacting well, but I think that's because we had, in some cases, almost 10 years of dinners together, field trips, knowing each other, which created a bond that even with Zoom we still have maintained. So that's exactly what I'm proposing, that we have shorter breaks for several days.
Liz, one thing that Joe and I did when we were working on the WSR, or the water supply reliability, was we took advantage of Google Meeting. And it means you're sort of independent of anybody who has access to Zoom. And that worked really well. It was very easy to set up, and it works across all platforms. And so just making members aware that they can have small meetings with, well, although I think Google Meeting actually can handle quite a few, but I guess because of the act we're under, we're limited by the number, but it would enable us to meet in small groups and at least get to know each other virtually.
Yeah, and I know for some of the interactions I've had with the science program that we've used Teams as another platform. So yeah, that there are other platforms. I guess I think that Zoom is available to everyone, at least for shorter meetings, but I'm not sure if it is available for the longer meetings. But anyway, other suggestions? Yeah, I guess we can, the chairship can think about the August meeting. It's not very far away. And at this point, I feel like we've blocked out the 13th and 14th, and we have arranged speakers and such for that time. So we may not be able to break that one into a week of 2-day meetings. But that could be something that you think about in the future, is to have more frequent but shorter meetings of the ISB. So yeah, I think, Steve, did you have something you wanted to say now? All right. Well, I think it's also important in any remote meeting setting to make sure to engage with everybody, just to not hesitate to, go around the Zoom tiles and give everybody a chance to weigh in on topics. So sometimes, for whatever reason, folks are hesitant to jump in, or it's awkward to figure out the right time to jump in. And so if there's an opportunity to again, just go around the Zoom tiles, as a check-in on issues or before wrapping up issues, I think that can be effective as well.
Yeah, I'd just like to encourage anyone, if they have any additional ideas, just to let us know, because I think it's going to be a challenge with the new board members. And in general, it would have been a challenge, but it's specifically a challenge under these kind of conditions. So you all know what has worked and what has made us develop that trust and respect and so forth. And I think, as Vince said, the meals and field trips and so forth, but maybe there's some things we can do to help encourage that in that new framework. And, just there's a lot of things that are available in general guidance for these sorts of things, but I'm thinking more specifically about guidance from individual board members about what they think it might be a valuable thing to do in this context. So just send an email. You got some ideas, anything.
One, I don't want to take up too much time, but one of the one possibility would be to help board members get to know one another, and so maybe having short presentations from each board member, both the present board members as well as the incoming, just like a 15-minute talk on your science or your expertise, so that at least folks would know. I mean, we sort of know from people's CVs and such what they bring to the board, but I think it'd be nice to have an understanding of the scholarship that each person is bringing to the board and the kinds of things that they've worked on. So that could be like a kind of like a getting to know you kind of activity. John?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, but I think that in establishing the camaraderie that we're aiming at and we've developed, maybe limit it more to 10 minutes and less on their science and their professional thing and more on what they are like as an individual. You know, what kind of hobbies do they do? Do they like to go camping? You know, what really drives their lives? You know, do they have, as we do right now, 4 or 5 dogs in the house running around all the time? I think that could be a critical element of breaking the ice and getting to people, because that's the sort of thing that always came out in our dinners and our pre-dinner drinks and all of that.
Yeah, so definitely concentrating on both the individual, the personal, as well as the professional side of people. Thank you. That's a great suggestion. All right. I'm not seeing any other hands up. So again, I know I'm interested in ways to facilitate this process, but we'll be rotating off the board. But Steve and Jay and I are all interested in any suggestions you have regarding ways to help make this transition as smooth as possible. Okay, so so that brings us into the August meeting. Let's see. And as everyone knows, this meeting will have both current members and incoming members. So it'll be a bit of a hybrid of doing some a little bit of orientation, as well as covering typical board business, and then trying to sort of, I guess, set the stage for work being transferred from present board members to new board members. So I think we have shared some of the ideas for the board. We will have a brief presentation by Laurel Larson, the incoming Delta lead scientist, and also John Callaway will be participating as well. As you know, his term is ending, so we'll do some acknowledgement of John, and then for day one, right now we have on the schedule an overview of Delta legislation and intent by Alf Brandt, and Alf's presentation has been confirmed. We will also have an introduction to the Delta Stewardship Council. All these activities are also confirmed. So Susan Tatayan, chair of the Stewardship Council, and or Jessica Pearson will give some remarks. We will have also short presentations and Q&A sessions with the planning director, Jeff Henderson, the science advisor, who is Louise Conrad, but Lauren Hastings will give that presentation on behalf of Louise. And then we'll also hear from Amanda Bowl, who is the DPIC coordinator. So any thoughts or questions about day one? I think the focus of day one will be really like why we, sorry, I lost my screen for a minute. Why we, what the purpose of the reviews are and how reviews have been used by especially the Stewardship Council and the science program, and then updates on the state of the different ongoing reviews. So comments or suggestions for day one?
One thing I would add to that is on the updates of the reviews, we talked about kind of changing the emphasis a little bit, rather than what we've done, more the focus on what needs to be done. And because in essence, this is the campaign to encourage new members to jump in and within these reviews, so we can, with a short review of what has been done, but more like what is our honest opinion and what really needs to be done, I would say in detail, so that we can think about, get questions from the new board members and really talk about that.
Yeah, I would say those updates should have 3 parts. So one would be kind of the broad context of why we're doing that review, and then kind of its current status, and then what needs to be done. See, I think Tracy had.
No, I was just scratching my eye.
Oh, okay. Vince.
Liz, I think you should ask those first 6 speakers to not get into details and just give overviews, because otherwise for the new board members, it's going to be deadly.
Yeah, well, they're not, I think it's not like 6 things in a row, but yeah, we will emphasize brevity.
And not so much, but the big picture, not the details.
Okay.
Because I know like when Jessica Pearson gives reports, there's so much detail involved in those that I think it's the big picture is really what's critical.
Okay, good point. Thank you. Okay. Other questions or comments on day one?
I just think it's really great that we're doing it, and having that overview like with Alf there, I think it's going to be great for the incoming board. I'm going to be curious to hear what we were supposed to have been doing all along. So
yes,
I know. I sort of wish we had that opportunity. Okay, and then so then going on to day 2, which is Friday the 14th, we'll have a presentation from DWR on the Delta Conveyance project, and that will be given by Carrie Buckman. That report, that presentation is also confirmed, and we're doing it at this meeting because really this relates back to the memo that we sent to DWR about the Delta Conveyance project, that we wanted an opportunity to talk about processes and best practices and lessons learned from previous reviews that we have done. And so this is a chance for Carrie to both address board members who have participated in those reviews, as well as to inform the new members of the board. And then also we will have an opportunity for reflections on day 2. And so we'll have reflections from the Delta lead scientist, as well as from outgoing members of the Delta ISB. And we're planning to, I'm planning, this is a heads up, I'm planning to ask all of the outgoing members of the board, including Joy, to draft a 1 or 2 page written reflection, as well as to give some oral comments. And the idea is that the written reflections will be around following our departure from the board. So there'll be a resource, since there'll be a written part of the meeting materials. So I'll just, again, open the floor to questions or comments on day 2. All right, so that's August, and then September, the next meeting will be September 17th and 18th, and at that time, Steve will be chairing the board. I'm assuming maybe the board will elect a chair-elect at that meeting. And then I guess many of us won't be a part of that meeting, although maybe we'll be listening in. So that's my updates for upcoming meetings.
Liz, were you going to talk about the post-meeting staff briefings?
The post-meeting staff briefings.
For August 14th.
August 14th to the 31st?
So I guess, sorry, can you just remind me of what that is? Or
Yeah, what I have here, and this would be after the 14th, that we were going to have, looks like staff briefings, but we were going to go into a sort of a greater depth of discussion of the ongoing reviews, with a complement of both those that are working on it now and those that will be working on it in the future.
right, yeah. So I don't have all the mechanics of that worked out, but yeah, the idea was that we were going to have like small breakout groups, and just to allow more interaction and informal interaction between the incoming and outgoing board members to, answer questions and discuss different aspects of the board. I guess I don't have that fully fleshed out yet, Steve. But,
okay, well, what I would suggest is that it might be a valuable thing between that August 14th and 31st timeframe to have at least 3 of those for any ongoing reviews, to have at least 3 of those sessions with a complement of those working on it and those that might want to work, I'd say, the ecosystems review. And you could have a couple of us or all of us and those who want to find out more about it, and then just have a sort of an open dialogue. This would hopefully not, we need to figure out how many people we can have in that meeting. This briefing that I got says we can have 7 because we technically have 15 members or something like that. But anyway, the idea is to put together those discussion groups that we could have a more open dialogue on what really needs to be done. And then they can really ask questions about, get an honest opinion, how much work's involved and where it is. So anyway, maybe that's something we just put on our list of things to do, to try and set up those things and figure out how many people we can have in each one of those.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I think that's a good idea, to use that time window between the 14th and the 31st to have those interactions. And I'll have to check with the council legal staff just to find out how many people can participate in those and such.
Yeah, because it looks like, I think what this says on this draft agenda is that our numbers will officially be 15 for that time period between August 14th and the 31st. So in theory, we could have up to 7 people doing one of these briefings and not have a quorum.
Yeah, I think that is correct.
Yeah.
Okay. But it also has to consider the mix of the current 9 as well as the future 10. But we can easily work that out.
Yeah, thank you. And if I understand also maybe John, you can answer this, but the incoming board members will have a briefing on Bagley-Keene in advance of our August meeting.
Yes, we're working on having a briefing with them and staff and legal on logistic issues, including all of the Bagley-Keene issues. So they will get updated separately on those details.
Great. Right. I guess any further questions, discussion, definitely send your ideas and thoughts about the August meeting. This is a really important meeting in a lot of different ways. So appreciate everyone's feedback. Okay, so let's see. I guess I don't do.
Joe's got something.
Oh, sorry. I can't. Who had something?
It's Joe.
Joe, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a comment. You know that the universities, when 14th, 15th meeting actually was set up, the universities were planning to open end of August. Now they have, at least our university has taken in. We are starting on the 10th and we are finishing on November 12th, and in person, all the classes. We don't have any Zoom unless special cases. So when we are setting up meetings, there will be a little bit of conflict. So we had to be in and out. So I had to apologize. For example, 14, 15 meeting, I had to teach, I think, in the morning. So it doesn't conflict. You are starting at 12. So I'm done at 11 our time. So there will be an issue when you set up meetings 2-hour time frame sometimes, because that might have a lot of conflict with others. And I see several people, at least 3 or 4 people coming in. They are from universities, so I don't know how they are going to operate. So we have to be a little bit more careful, just to kind of give you a heads up that there will be changes.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah, if you maybe you could send me your maybe send to Steve and Edmund and I your schedule for the 13th and 14th.
No. I will try to come as much as possible, except 1 hour might be an issue, but except that I will be there.
Okay.
Right. So I don't have any issue currently, but in the future, just to let you know.
Okay.
It might be useful in that light to check people's availability in September, and particularly, well, the current and the new board members. And I don't know if we set those dates prior to their official approval. So, because those dates, I presume, are flexible. So we just want to make sure that we can get full attendance on that September meeting. And then from there, we can set up a calendar and follow some of the recommendations that Vince and others have made about multiple mini meetings or something like that.
Yeah, we did let the incoming members know the August and September dates. So they have those on their calendar, but we also let them know that occasionally meetings do get moved around for all the reasons that have been mentioned. So I think that certainly it would be useful to make sure, as Joe highlighted, 3 of them are still working and 2 of them are teaching regularly.
So I'll just ask for any public comment on our discussion related to remote meetings and our August agenda.
There are none.
Okay, so that brings us to a review of items for follow-up from this meeting, and I'll turn things over to Edmund to begin that discussion.
Yes. So the first follow-up item I have is from the Delta Lead Scientist Report. As John mentioned earlier, registration is open for the Science Action Agenda workshop, along with a questionnaire to help seek feedback on management questions. He'll send everyone the link afterwards, along with the questionnaire, and he encourages any individual ISB members to provide feedback if you have any at this time, or to register for the workshop for those who are planning to attend. He'll also send information about the Spring Run Chinook Salmon workshop that he mentioned earlier today. And also, John mentioned that the Delta Science Program is in the process of recruiting a California Sea Grant specialist for the social sciences. And if you have any input, please provide them to him directly as soon as possible, since they're going to need that soon if you have any feedback on the candidates based off of your seminar viewing. For the ecosystems review, today you guys had a discussion on the public draft, and John Weems is going to take a stab at revising it based off the comments received today, in particular Tom's comment about better tying in climate change and rapid environmental change up front. So John Weems will make the revisions as discussed today and seek individual feedback from Tom and Steve. And afterwards, it will go out for a 30-day public comment period. Depending on when we get the draft released, it may or may not be, it may or may not be, public comments may or may not be back by the August 13th to 14th date, but we'll try to encourage public members to provide comments before the meeting. For the monitoring enterprise review, Vince mentioned that the team is in the process of scheduling interviews, and shortly after this meeting, I will be checking all members' availability and interest to participate. So it's open to everyone beyond just the lead authors, and those who are staying on after August 31st are encouraged to participate. For the water supply reliability, right now, the lead authors are in the process of seeking individual feedback from ISB members. Please provide comments back to staff by close of business on July 28th. For the science needs assessment, I just have some follow-up items on my end. I think Steve requested that we make a slight edit to the slides to make sure that the planning team also incorporates Dick Norgard. So sorry, Dick, about that oversight. For the IEP review, I also have a follow-up item to continue working on some of the summaries of the JPA's discussions that have been occurring in Delta. And as soon as I get that finished, Tracy will recontact Stephanie following on next steps. For preparation for upcoming meetings, today we had some good discussion on some strategies on how to make meetings more effective, such as making sure that meetings are shorter and more focused. But if there's any more additional ideas post-meeting, feel free to send those off to staff and or the chairship, along with feedback on the August agenda, where we have a few presenters already confirmed. And I'm gonna, and due to the idea of scheduling perhaps shorter meetings, I'm just going to follow up with everyone if they're aware of their availability on September 17th and 18th to see how we can shorten those meetings up. That's all I have right now. Please let me know if anything needs to be added or changed.
That was very thorough. And did Edmund miss anything, or anybody aware of other things that are needed for follow-up? Okay. All right, so let's, we'll now have an opportunity for public comment, both for matters that are not on the agenda, but within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Delta ISB. So it can be on things that have been discussed during this meeting, but also things outside the scope of the meeting.
And there are none.
There are none. Okay, well, I guess that concludes another meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. I hope everybody stays well, keep up the good work, and I look forward to seeing you in August. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Thank you, Liz.
Thanks, Liz.